In 2016 and 17, I visited Tempelhof Airport in Berlin to collaborate with asylum seekers from Syria and Afghanistan. Most of them had lived in the airport ever since it was partially converted into a refugee camp the year before. I knew the airport well. Years earlier, I had made a project about the airport's closure. It revealed my interest in the topics of change and transitions. To come back to this place and to the people who inhabited it in this moment shifted my perception. I realized that change and transitions can't be looked at as isolated events. You don't just arrive somewhere and that's it. End of story. No. One is always adapting to ever new circumstances. I began to see change and transitions as fundamental. So I expanded the work and looked for moments of transition and transformation in other areas. In nature, for example. In her essay for this book, Annaka Harris writes, "Our sense of connection deepens when we meditate on impermanence, as we bear witness to the fact that nothing ever truly disappears. Everything, from molecules to mountains to life, continually recycles and changes form. To perceive change as transformation rather than loss allows me to embrace the reality that everything truly is impermanent."
I was wondering, we were just talking about the emotion in this shot, and I was curious about how aware you were of how her right eye is captured in that part of the glass and how it conveys so much. And I was curious how much time you spent with her or with any of the people you were photographing.
Like in total, I spent I think 6 weeks that summer at the airport. But most of that time was like spent on to get access was the main thing and most of the work. And then there were, 2 or 3 people who were really willing to spend a lot of time with me and move through the whole building with me. And so I was shooting with them a lot. But these portraits in particular, that was like a 2-day shoot. And we tried to get as many people together as possible and get as many images in. But the glass was so unpredictable that I had to shoot a lot in order to get, ultimately find the one shot that would be working. It's just moving back and forth a little bit, whether I was moving back and forth or they were moving back and forth, it was a very different image. But which ultimately speaks to what these portraits are about, right? The whole shifting and reshaping. That's why I wanted to take that picture behind that glass.
And the inclusion of these materials is incredibly interesting and just gives it another dimension. And I love how it also, it gives it a beauty and an emotionality, but it also gives the respect you were talking about to what they're going through. And enables a privacy while they're actually sharing so much. Have you stayed in touch with any of them?
I have. I actually just, since the book is just ready, I met up with Nargis, for example, is one of them who I met. She was 14, I think, when we took that shot.
How old my daughter is?
She's about 19, 20 now. She just finished school, best of her class, by the way. And is now trying to figure out what to do next. And Nada's another woman who's also in the book. She has the blonde hair and we only see her back. She's studying psychology and the school where she's going to is in the airport. They rented out part of the building to have their school in the airport. So she's going back to that place where she lived as a refugee for over a year.
Interesting.
But now as a student of psychology. So she's like, I'm writing my own story. And,
it's beautiful.
And I love that.
That actually, that segues nicely into a lot of thoughts that I jotted down when I was spending time with your work in this book. I've been looking at these images for a long time, but it's only recently that I was able to see them in the book. Okay, so I'm going to ramble.
Please, go ahead, ramble.
And this is just kind of for me to share with you where I've been the last few days, looking at, being with your work.
Yeah.
And then we'll just see where it goes.
Let's do it.
So when Douglas first showed me all of these pieces that were going to be included in the book, I was confused about why you were juxtaposing these portraits of refugees with your landscape photography. It wasn't immediately clear to me how these went together. And then I read the piece that you included in your book, and it just immediately became clear to me, the thread that goes through all of this and how they're intimately connected. And I felt especially embarrassed because it's so related to my own work that I was surprised that it didn't strike me right away. But I spent a lot of time thinking about that and my reaction to that. And so I'll get into that a little bit. But please. The thing that I really connected with and that I love and appreciate about this body of work in particular is that I think, in my own work, I think so much about the fact that impermanence is such an integral part of the natural world, yet it's so often the source of human suffering, and how we reconcile those two things. And so I was thinking about what I think we have in common, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we share just this innate fascination with the natural world and the universe and the deepest questions about time and interconnection and impermanence and what this is all about, down to our interest in the different interpretations of quantum mechanics. And what I noticed in my own work when I was able to spend a lot of time working with physicists and neuroscientists and delving into these things that interest me is it became clear to me that it was a kind of therapy for me, actually, that thinking about those things gave me some comfort and relief from my turmoil around human suffering, on every scale. And there's kind of a gentle art, I think, that for me feels like a lifelong journey that is just a lesson I have to keep learning. Yeah. But there's this gentle art of being able to be connected to suffering, being open to suffering, being able to stare it in the face, your own and others, and all that is around us all the time, and not fall into a place of despair or overwhelm, but also at the same time staying connected to the goodness and the beauty and creativity of humanity, and the paradox almost of the fact that so much of that comes out of suffering often. So much of the beautiful music and art and creativity comes out of suffering. And how we grapple with that is just something I think about. Probably a day doesn't go by that I'm not thinking about that on some level. Yeah. So I just wanted to first read two quotes of yours that really spoke to me and made me feel, before I had even met you, a real connection. And so the first one is when you're talking about the portraits of the refugees that you worked on. And you say, "I remember individuals who touched me with their ability to remain open and compassionate in the face of radical change and great uncertainty." And so, that encapsulates everything I was rambling on about. And then I'll read the other one. You wrote, "Much of my time is spent wondering how we can move through these changes with openness and tenderness instead of fear." Yeah. So I could see the wheels spinning as I was talking. So, do you want to?
Yeah, one of the things that comes to mind, I think, where this search for me comes from, for this, like, how do we stay open in the face of change? Like, I would always have the tendency to not fight or flight, but to freeze up. Yeah. So that's my intuitive reaction to change and to uncomfortable situations. And I realized at some point, I don't know, it started in my mid-20s, I guess, I started to see that is what I was doing, and how that influenced everything in my life. Yeah. And how I needed to then get out of that. How do I loosen up and get out of that like cramp almost. And to keep moving again. And so I started looking for movement in my work as well, you know. And that got me to then change, like as one of the big challenges, like that I, you know, tend to freeze up upon when I'm faced with it.
Yeah.
And so I think that is what started the trajectory of like putting change at the heart of my work. And then, you know, photography or making art about it became kind of like the healing tool. You mentioned therapy.
Yeah,
so
we were just talking about that earlier.
Like it helps me to, you know, to look it in the eye, and you have this kind of like little protection tool in your hand, which is protecting you. It's like literally in front of you, between the thing that you're afraid of and yourself. And it helps me to look at it closer and with more depth, and to, and then from there, it's a long journey. It's, you know, decades long, or probably a lifelong journey to accept change versus resisting it, because that's what I've been doing for the longest time. Yeah. And continuing to do this work helps me, you know, to practice that. Yeah. Because I think it is a practice. It's not something that you decide one day or learn one day and, you know, that's it. But it's like a daily practice. And so that's where the work is happening for me as well.
I created a meditation for this purpose, actually, for myself, and then the theme of that meditation was this very contraction that you're talking about, that I still struggle with. And it's interesting, I really think that was part of my reaction to your work at first. And when I spent the last few days thinking more about it and just kind of letting myself get absorbed in it. And I realized when I see the portraits, I feel for them, and my first reaction is to push away is too strong a word, but to contract. I don't want to feel the pain. Yeah. And that's my first response, is to kind of push it away. Whereas the therapy, you know, the thing that helps me be open and looking at natural phenomena and taking a bigger perspective and realizing this is all part of something much larger than ourselves, and death and destruction and birth, it's all part of the natural world, and is the way things are, and that enables me to access compassion and connection. Once I settled into that, the beauty of juxtaposing these images just keeps growing for me. And now seeing them large, which I hadn't seen before, they're very powerful. And you can see how change takes place on different time scales, but it is ultimately all nature unfolding in the way that it's unfolding, for the most part out of our control.
What I personally found also, and I think that's what's happening also in this body of work, is that when, you know, I needed to find different ways to look at change without fear, or, you know, in a more peaceful way. And one way to do that, and that comes out in this body of work, is like to look at change, or the part of change that is transformation, you know, and transitioning, and that things are always becoming, you know, that because oftentimes change feels so much like loss for me personally. And I needed to shift that narrative, because yes, it's true, like within change there's loss, but that's only like half of of the thing. And so like to look at change as transformation, as becoming, as shifting,
there's an excitement to
not
it.
As loss. It's like so much better for me personally too. And I think this is what this is about, and the title, right? A mountain is only a slow wave. It's like these things are moving, whether or not we see it with our own eyes, you know, but they are. Internally they are, you know, as much as we're changing the whole time. The bigger picture is also something that helps me as well. I think that's why when I'm sharing, you know, the interest for like science and philosophy and all these like bigger thinking machines, let's say, to put it on a big scale. I think I realized that the first time when I was reading Yuval Harari, And I realized then, like this bigger picture that he's drawing, how far he's going out. I was like, oh, this feels so good and so relaxing, you know, as a thing to do, as a mind, as a thinking process to do, instead of being here my body, being here all the time, you know. And so, and I realized, I think that's what I've been doing unknowingly with these other topics that I'm bringing into the work and that I'm myself am interested in.
We were talking a little bit before about how we both experienced illnesses when we were young. I don't know if you want to talk about any of that, because I found that really interesting. That I know for myself that it clearly plays a role, but people can have these experiences without that.
That's true.
But yeah, no, I was interested to learn that you had had a similar experience starting at birth, I guess.
Yeah, at birth. Yeah.
Tell me the name of it again, I don't remember.
I think in English it's neurodermatitis.
Yeah.
It had a huge influence, definitely, in my life, and it still does.
Yeah.
But the beauty of, you know, using art also to understand the world better and yourself better is that you allow yourself a way into it without running away, but to really face the things that stop you from becoming who you already are, essentially.
Yeah, right.
You know.
And acceptance. There's something really transformative about acceptance.
Oh, absolutely.
I think that's partly what looking at the larger time scales or the slower time scales and the bigger picture is also helpful for, now that I think about it, is realizing that it's bigger than you, and certain things are the way they are, and fighting them is kind of useless.
Yeah, when I was like starting with my healing path, like in my mid-20s, let's say, I realized this one thing, which was like, there's an illness that I need to overcome, that's one thing. But what holds me back even more is like, one, the resistance that I have to heal, to be honest, which sounds contradictory because it
requires acceptance. You have to admit that it's there.
Yeah, and it's weird to, you know, you would think that it's like, of course you want to heal, right? But if you grew up with something and it's so much intricate part of who you are, you know, it's like it was part of my identity to live with this illness, whether it was good or bad, but it was a part of me. So like, saying like I want to live without that was like, you know, I have to cut off my left arm. It's like it's the same thing. It's the same feeling of like, why would I do that? Like I don't know who I am after that. You know, I'm losing a part of my identity. As destructive as it, and again, like there comes the change, right? So resistance towards that was a lot, that was the main thing that I had to overcome and to understand. And that's the other thing, that most of it is habit. Like that was such a relief when I understood that. You know, that those three elements, like the resistance, the habit, and the illness itself, are very different parts, and that they have to be tackled in different ways in order to overcome and to heal. You know.
Yeah, it's so interesting.
And I came across like a quote during that time, actually, and it's more like an equation. It was just like pain times resistance equals suffering. And I was like, this is what I'm doing. I'm suffering the whole time. Like, and to understand that you can separate suffering, or that you can suffer less if you take away the resistance. That was like mind-blowing to me. You know, that there will always be pain.
Me too, I had a very similar epiphany. Go ahead.
There will always be pain, but the resistance is the thing that makes it, turns it into suffering.
That's right.
You know. And that helped me immensely.
was thinking of a couple of things there. But one, I'm curious about when you started meditating and when that became part of your life.
Pretty late.
Yeah.
Like I was already 3 years into making this body of work actually when I did my first retreat.
But those epiphanies, it sounded like they came before you started meditating. Yeah. When I learned about meditation and then actually began to seriously practice, it helped me understand those realizations better, and it helped me move forward with them. And I was able to actually, make changes and break habits. But it is interesting that these are the types of realizations that people have when they spend a lot of time meditating too. That there's kind of a universal understanding that can be had when you experience and realize your own process of how you respond to your own pain and to other people's pain and suffering. Yeah.
Exactly.
Something that is intimately connected to all of these topics too for me is the kind of dissolving of the boundary between self and other, and how healing that can be, but that it's also grounded in scientific truth that we feel there are boundaries that aren't actually there, and that perfectly ties into this quote that I'm excited to share with you. So Adam Frank is an astrophysicist. He's written a few books. He's very interesting. He has a strong meditation practice and is interested in Buddhist philosophy. And he's now working on a new project in collaboration with some other scientists, looking at what information is and how information carries meaning, and not emotional meaning, but as information. So the way you look at the word green, and it's these symbols and scribbles, but we look at it and we gain meaning from it. We understand what green is,
what it means.
But ultimately, these are scribbles, and how does that work, and how do we define information? So this is an article that just came out in February. So he says, it's not always clear what is the system and what is the environment. The boundaries can be fluid and dynamic, meaning they can change with time. In all cases, there's a way of looking at the problem in which the system and the environment emerge together. This is particularly true if we want to explore the origin of life, where the system is explicitly creating itself. Think about a cell swimming in a bath of chemicals. What makes the cell different from the chemicals? It's the cell membrane that uses information to decide what to let in and what to keep out. But the membrane must continually be recreated and maintained by the cell from materials in the environment. And yet it's the membrane which lets the cell decide what constitutes the self, the cell, and what constitutes the outside world, which is the bath of chemicals. Thus, in a very real sense, the bath, as a bath with different resources that can be used or not, comes into existence along with the cell. The two are complementary. The cell brings the bath into being as a bath because the bath is meaningful to it, but the bath allows the cell to come into being as well. In this way, the living organism and the world it inhabits create each other.
Yeah.
That reminded me of your work. Yeah. And my work, and the things that we're both so interested in, and the things that bring peace to the turmoil and the feeling of being separate or alone or in conflict, and to realize it is ultimately all part of the same thing.
And that things only, I think Rovelli is talking about that as well, like how things always and only exist in relationship to something.
I have a Rovelli quote too. Should I read it? Or do you want to read it?
No, you should read it.
Okay. So he says, this is Carlo Rovelli in Helgoland. He says, if we imagine the totality of things, we are imagining being outside the universe, looking at it from out there. But there is no outside to the totality of things. The external point of view is a point of view that does not exist. Every description of the world is from inside it. The externally observed world does not exist. What exists are only internal perspectives on the world, which are partial and reflect one another. The world is this reciprocal reflection of perspectives.
Yeah. But I think what's confusing is that also the mindsets in the mind, the patterns that we learned, like from school or from society or the world we live in, right? It's like, it's the opposite. All these ideas around the possibility of separation, you know, that's the worldview that most of us grew up with. And it's so limited and even false. And well, it stirs you into the wrong direction all the time.
No, you know? I agree. It's so natural. It's so part of human nature. I think partly because of what Adam Frank is describing about the cell. There's something about the differentiation that makes it what it is, but ultimately, it leads to so much suffering, and it takes us apart from. It makes us think we're apart from the thing that we are actually included in, and. Yeah, I think it would be nice to see a shift in our culture, kind of fighting that narrative that so naturally comes up for us. But I did have one quote about meditation here. I'll just read it and we'll see. This is Susan Blackmore, who also is a psychologist and studies consciousness, and actually has a wonderful book that you would probably enjoy. I don't know, do you know her work, Sue Blackmore? No. She has a short book called Conversations on Consciousness, which was one of the first books I read about consciousness, and she's talking to different philosophers, and they're just transcripts of her conversations with them. And this was a book that she wrote later called Zen and the Art of Consciousness. And it's kind of a diary of her meditation retreat. She sits, I think it's a month-long meditation retreat, and she kept a diary. And in one moment of, having a realization, she says, "There's no more mirror, no distinction between self and the world. There is just this stuff springing up out of no place and no time, with no continuous someone to whom it appears. So what is this stuff, and where is it coming from? I peer into the nothingness out of which it all seems to be manifesting itself. I can't imagine what it is." So related to what we were talking about, but I love that. It's I don't know, getting kind of lost almost in the mysterious nature of all of it.
But without fear, I think.
Right.
Like that's the beauty of, like, that's at least the experience that I had with meditation. I don't have much of a practice, I have to be honest, but like at least these like small moments that I remember very well. And that meditation allows you to step into that nothingness and you dissolving, the world's dissolving, but you're not afraid in it.
Right.
Which is like something that I brought back to the work. And when I was talking with people about the work, like I had a good friend and she asked, like, but where, because I keep talking about change and change is a constant and somehow that's positive, like, because I had this feeling that there is something healing about facing change and moving with change, but there's also this huge threat, right? It's like we are worried about it and in facing it and afraid. And so she was like, but where? And she asked the perfect question, which I then took another 3 years to work around. Because I felt like I need to be able to answer that question, which is like, where do we find grounding in a world that's constantly changing?
Yeah.
You know, and I was like, this work somehow needs to not deliver an answer of that, but like at least hopefully lead a way towards like there's peace also in that, in change.
No, I think your work does that really, really beautifully. It actually reminds me of an analogy I used recently, and I can't remember if I used it in this piece or not, but I used an analogy about a river, and that there's, in one sense, a river is constantly changing and constantly moving, and you actually have the sense that it's headed somewhere, like it feels like it's moving.
Yeah.
You know, that's our immediate reaction to what a river is. It's something that starts here and goes there. And then I don't remember how I put it, but something to the effect of, if you are the river, you're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
And there's something about that in meditation of the change is there, but when you're part of the whole thing, when you see the big picture, at bottom, that's where the ground is that there's nowhere really to go.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you
it's like Ravelli says, there's nowhere, you can't step outside of it. I mean, you're always in it, and it's always there.
Yeah. So the title of the work, A Mountain is Only a Slow Wave, comes from this quote from Paul R. Fleischman. I hope I am saying his name right. And he wrote an essay that is called The Experience of Impermanence from 1994. He's a Vipassana meditator. And he's describing and says, the Pali word anicca is translated into English as impermanence or change. Anicca is a word indicator that points to a fact of reality, the ceaseless transformation of all material in the universe. Nothing is solid, permanent, immutable. Everything is really an event. Even a stone is a form of river, and a mountain is only a slow wave.
I was curious, and I was noticing how some of them are just so resonate with me. They're so powerful. They, like, everything that we've been talking about that takes 5 sentences to express, I could get just in one photograph, which is, you know, the power of art and your talent. But I was wondering if there are any images, or if there's one in particular that does that for you in the book. And I'm happy to share the ones that did that for me. I'm not even sure why the ones that stood out for me, just emotionally impactful. Like, those are the ones I kind of just marked. But I wondered if you had one.
I think, can I have a look?
Yeah.
I know, and then I forget again.
Yeah, I know, me too. When I'm interviewed, I bring my book to every interview because I'm afraid I'll forget something I said. And I do.
Reminded. I think it's maybe more, I mean, the portraits themselves, obviously, you know.
Yes.
Oh yeah, I have one.
Okay.
One that I always return to, let's say.
Mm-hmm. That's a good measure.
What I like about this one, and I think I've done that in my previous work as well, is like, and you were talking about a membrane moving, you know, the threshold where things are moving inside and outside, which is both the inside and the outside. Yeah. And I think this image is doing that for me. And it just dissolves like every hard line that might be there, you know.
I feel that too, yeah.
So in that sense, and aesthetically, this is just like I think it's a strong image.
Yeah.
Conceptually, I think this one is also one that reminds me of like the flow of things, even though they seem to be fixated.
I was just going to say it's such a beautiful visualization of the title from the quote, that hearing the title and seeing this image to me is very powerful.
Yeah. I'm struggling to give my single images titles. I'm also struggling to give the whole work a title. So the title is usually the thing that comes last. But this image is carrying actually also the title of the work. So this is like the image.
Yeah, seems right. Yeah.
So that's a good reminder whenever I forget that what I want to talk about.
Right,
yeah, what the work is about.
There,
like, right, this is what the But there's another one that also fits that a little bit. I took this in Greece, and they were replacing like old stones for new stones, essentially, like that. And they're continually doing that. So I was like standing in front of it thinking like, what is it I'm actually looking at? Right? And so that was... And kind of like that moment of realization that I'm thinking I'm looking at an old building, but actually it's just the idea of that I'm looking at. Yeah. Because the stones are not from back in the day, they're newer. And this image kind of like speaks about that a little bit. So that's also always a good reminder.
It's also true of any life form.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Someone's replacing our stones.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, we're doing it all the time, right?
Right.
Our cells are doing it all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think on a more emotional and human scale, I would always go back to the portraits because they are about identity in a way, and how to, the moment when you maybe lose part of your identity because you have to move into something else and you become something else. It's like for better or worse, you have to go through this change, whether you like it or not, and it's happening, and that this is essentially always what we're like, whether we can see it or not, but that there is no finished self. And
it's amazing how much is being expressed when not only is it distorted from the glass, but you can't see her face. Something about the position of her head and what her arm is doing. Yeah. I love how expressive it is.
Yeah, I don't think we need a lot of information oftentimes to get a sense of a situation. Rather, I think sometimes it's even the opposite. If you show, you were asking me for a moment there, if I took pictures of them without the glass. Yeah. And I think it's distracting, because because then we don't have to do the work. We don't have to do the work. We can just look at somebody else and we see them for what they are going through, but we don't make that connection. It's hindering us to make that connection. Whereas this allows us to step up, to look closer, to engage, and to see ourselves maybe, in part.
I think that's right. Or combinations of other people that we've known that have
exactly. Yeah.